She covered her sister's shift as a maid and ended up meeting the CEO, single dad who needed her most. The storm rolled in fast over Queens, cloaking the city in thick gray rain. Thunder echoed in the distance, and the window panes of the small apartment rattled with each gust of wind. Inside, Laura sat cross-legged on the floor beside the old space heater, a thick medical textbook open in her lap. Her long blonde hair was twisted into a messy bun, strands sticking to her forehead. A cup of instant noodles sat untouched beside her, now soggy and cold. She was still in her scrubs from class, a hoodie thrown over them for warmth. Her final exam was in the morning, clinical diagnostics, the last obstacle before graduation. She had been studying for hours, and yet nothing seemed to be sticking. She ran a highlighter across the same line 3 times, eyes glazed. Then her phone rang. She jumped. The screen read, "Rachel." She answered on the first ring. "Hey, Laura." Rachel's voice was shaky, strained. "I fell. I can't stand." Laura straightened up. "What happened?" "I was working and I slipped my ankle. It's bad. I don't think I can go to my next shift." "What shift?" "The new client in Westchester. Tonight's the trial." "First night." There was a long pause. "You want me to go?" "Please, just this once, Rachel. I have an exam at 8 a.m. "I know. I'm sorry, but I can't lose this one. It's a mansion, Laura. Rich clients, regular hours. If I cancel tonight, it's over before it starts." Laura pressed her fingers against her eyes. "You said it was just a trial. You've never seen me before. They don't know what I look like. You can go as me. Uniforms clean, IDs in the pocket. You just have to show up, do the basics, and leave." Laura stood up and began pacing. "You know I'm not a cleaner." "You know enough," Rachel replied. "You've helped me before. It's nothing fancy. Wipe down the surfaces, tidy up a bit, maybe a couple of bedrooms. That's it." Laura looked around the tiny apartment. Their backpacks hung on the back of the door. A single coat rack by the fridge held both of their jackets. One cracked window was stuffed with old towels to block the draft. Rachel's ankle was likely swelling fast. She was alone and still thinking about work. She exhaled slowly. "Fine, you'll go." I said, "Fine. Text me the address." "Thank you," Rachel whispered. "Really?" Laura ended the call without replying. She moved quickly, knowing she would lose her nerve if she thought too long. In the bathroom, she found the pressed gray uniform and plastic wrap hanging from the hook. She stripped out of her hoodie and scrubs and changed. It was a little big on her, but not enough to matter. The ID clipped to the front read R. Martinez. She tightened her ponytail and splashed cold water on her face. At the front door, she pulled on her boots and raincoat, grabbed her umbrella, bent, barely usable, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit her like a slap, and the umbrella nearly flipped in her hand. She forced it upright and ran to the subway, water already seeping into her shoes. On the platform, she checked the address Rachel had sent. Hawthorne Lane, Westchester, a neighborhood far removed from their world. As the train pulled in, she stepped inside, soaking wet, heart pounding. She clutched her bag to her chest and tried not to think about what tomorrow would look like. Just tonight, just one favor, then back to studying. Then back to her life. The cab rolled to a quiet stop at the edge of a long curved driveway. Laura stepped out into the rain, the estate rising before her like something out of a forgotten dream. The house was massive. Stone columns, tall windows, slate roof dark with water. But there was something strange in its stillness. The lights glowed, yes, but dimly, as if the house were asleep. Not warm, not alive. She clutched the handle of her umbrella as she approached the heavy wooden door. Her heart thudded louder than the thunder. Before she could knock, the door creaked open. A tall man stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the soft light behind him. He looked like he had just come out of a long meeting or a sleepless night or both. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, the top button undone. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows. Sharp jawline graying at the temples. His eyes were dark, tired, and deeply guarded. He said nothing at first, just scanned her quickly, uniform, badge, the umbrella dripping at her feet. "Then you're from the cleaning service." Laura hesitated, startled by his directness. "Yes, I'm Rachel." He didn't question it. His eyes flicked to the badge. "You're late." "Sorry," she mumbled. He stepped aside. "Just the first floor, living room and library. No need to go upstairs." She nodded quickly and stepped past him. The door closed behind her with a quiet thud. Inside, the space was breathtaking and yet strangely cold. Polished floors, crown molding, art she could never afford to study, let alone hang on her walls. But no flowers, no signs of life, no warmth. It felt more like a showroom than a home. Laura walked softly into the living room and set down her cleaning bag. She glanced once toward the hallway, then began wiping down surfaces with careful practiced motions. Her nerves were still buzzing. She was halfway through dusting the coffee table when she heard it. A small shuffle behind her, like bare feet on tile. She turned. A boy stood at the edge of the room, maybe 4 years old, pale with soft brown hair and big gray eyes that seemed too serious for someone his age. He clutched a stuffed elephant in one hand, the other hanging limply at his side. Laura froze, then offered a soft smile. "Hi there." He didn't answer, just tilted his head slightly. "I'm just here to clean a little." "What's your name?" Still nothing. He blinked up at her, curious, but quiet. She glanced at the tissues in her apron pocket, then reached in and pulled one out. With a few swift folds, she shaped it into a small paper plane. "You want to see something cool?" she whispered. The boy's eyes followed her hand as she gently tossed the plane toward him. It fluttered awkwardly, landed near his feet. He bent to pick it up and smiled. Just slightly. A flicker of amusement. Laura's heart melted. Behind her, a voice spoke. "Ever smiles for strangers." She turned sharply. The man from before stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely over his chest. He wasn't scowling, but he wasn't smiling either. His gaze stayed fixed on his son, not Laura. "I didn't mean to bother him," she said quickly. "You didn't?" His voice was low, even. "He's just cautious. That's all." The little boy looked up at his father, then back at Laura, still holding the paper plane. "I'll finish up and go," she said, her hands back to wiping. But David Whitmore did not leave the room. He stayed there a moment longer, watching the woman with the mop and the nervous smile, who somehow made his son laugh. And for the first time in a very long time, he did not feel completely alone. The house had grown quieter since Laura arrived, but not in the hallway it had before. The living room, once stiff and silent, now held the faint echo of a child's laughter and the rustle of light footsteps. Laura continued wiping the shelves, careful and steady, occasionally glancing at the small boy watching from the hallway. Theo had not spoken much, but he hadn't left. He clutched the paper plane in one hand and leaned against the wall like a tiny guard. "Dinner's ready," a deep voice called. Laura turned to see David at the dining room archway, sleeves rolled, a dish towel on his shoulder. She blinked. "I can move out of the way." He shook his head. "My chef's off tonight. I cooked. My son has already invited you." Theo gave a small, solemn nod. Laura hesitated, then wiped her hands. I really shouldn't. It's just spaghetti, David said, already turning. The dining room was long and elegant, but the food was modest. 3 plates, simple spaghetti, and a bowl of salad. Theo climbed into his booster seat. David gestured to the chair beside him. After the party, did you try to break into the clubs? Laura sat cautiously. Do you always have your cleaners join you? David didn't look up. Only the ones who fold paper airplanes. She laughed, the tension easing for a moment. Theo ate more than expected, even leaning into Laura and whispering, "You eat slow." David looked up, surprised. He doesn't usually talk to anyone. Laura smiled. I must have special spaghetti energy. David's eyes lingered. Have you worked in cleaning long? Laura stiffened. Not exactly. I've just helped family. So, this isn't your main job? No, I'm finishing school. What are you studying? She hesitated. Health sciences. He nodded slowly, silent, but studying her as if she were a puzzle. After dinner, Laura cleared plates. David watched, distracted, not stopping her. When she reached for her coat, Theo appeared at her side, small fingers clutching hers. Can you read me a story? He asked. Laura blinked. Me? He nodded, already tugging. She looked back at David. If it's okay, just one. His arms crossed, but he gave a short nod. Second room on the left. Theo's room was neat. Pale blue walls, books lined on a low shelf. A nightlight glowed softly. Laura helped him onto the bed and picked a story about a bear who couldn't sleep. As she read, Theo's head tilted until it rested on her arm, his breathing evened out, his stuffed elephant tucked under the blanket, the tissue plain on the nightstand. She whispered, the last line, and closed the book. When she turned, David was at the doorway, silent, watching. She rose slowly, brushing Theo's hair back before stepping into the hall. Thank you, David said quietly. For what? He looked toward the bed. For giving him that. He hasn't let anyone in there since. He stopped, voice fading. Laura didn't ask. She didn't need to. I should go, she whispered. He followed her downstairs. At the door, she reached for the knob, but he stepped ahead, lifting an umbrella. Without a word, he held it above her as they stepped into the rain. Hard to find someone who cleans and reads bedtime stories, he murmured. She glanced up, startled by the softness in his voice. Thank you for today, he added. She could only nod. As she walked toward the gate, he stood watching until she vanished into the night. Later, he paused outside Theo's door. His son was fast asleep, arms around his elephant, the faintest smile on his face. David leaned against the frame, whispering into the quiet, you smiled for her, buddy. Something I haven't seen you do in a very long time. The next morning, David Whitmore sat at the edge of his desk, phone to his ear. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of his home office, but he barely registered it. I want the same woman back, he said firmly. Rachel, the one from last night. Send her again. There was a pause on the other end. Mr. Whitmore, I'll need to confirm her schedule. Then confirm it, he said curtly, then ended the call. He leaned back, silent for a moment. Something had shifted in his house last night. For the first time in a long time, it had felt less like a museum and more like a home. Theo had smiled, laughed even, and David would not let that slip away. Back in Queens, Rachel was still resting when Laura came home from class. Her ankle was elevated, wrapped in gauze. She looked pale but managed a small smile. They called? Rachel murmured. The client wants me again. Laura raised a brow. And I told them yes. Rachel's voice was calm. Then I gave them your number instead. Laura blinked. "Rachel, you didn't again." She said, "Keep her Facebook." "I did." She held Laura's gaze. "I can't go, Laura. You saw my ankle, but he asked for me, which means he asked for you." Laura rubbed her temples. "I have exams. I can't just play housekeeper for some man in Westchester." Before Rachel could argue, Laura's phone rang. Unknown number. She stared at the screen, then answered. "Rachel." The voice was unmistakable. Calm, deep, unmistakably David Whitmore. Laura's pulse spiked. "Yes, this is Whitmore. I'd like you to return today. I'll arrange for transportation. You'll be compensated." I don't think you can," he interrupted, his tone firm, but not unkind. "Please, I insist." Laura hesitated. She thought of Theo's small hand gripping hers, his shy laugh. The paper airplane sailing across the room. "I'll come," she said softly. That afternoon, a black car waited for her at campus. The driver held the door. Laura slipped inside, balancing her books on her lap. She reminded herself, just for a few days, nothing more. At the estate, David greeted her at the door. This time, he wore a crisp suit. He looked more composed, but the tiredness in his eyes was still there. "You're here," he said quietly. Then added, "Good. Think of it less as cleaning, more as tutoring my son. He responds to you." Laura crossed her arms. "Only after classes and no extra pay. I'm not doing this for the money." David nodded, almost smiling. "As you wish." The days took on a quiet rhythm. Laura arrived each afternoon, changed into her uniform, and moved through the house with quiet familiarity. On the nights when the kitchen staff was off, she cooked simple meals. Grilled cheese, tomato soup, pasta with soft-boiled eggs. She folded Theo's tiny socks, cleaned his playroom, and helped him arrange his picture books. She answered every question he asked, even the ones that came in whispers at bedtime. Theo began to trail after her everywhere. He waited for her by the stairs, held her hand when they walked through the garden, and laughed when she built towers out of cereal boxes and old Lego bricks. David saw it all. Sometimes from the study window, sometimes from the doorway, silent and still, he watched as Laura dusted Theo's room and uncovered an old photo frame wedged between storybooks. She wiped it clean and placed it on his desk, a photo of a woman with warm eyes cradling a baby. Theo's mother. Another evening, Laura found a threadbare toy elephant in a box labeled "Donate." She did not say a word, just brushed it off, fluffed it up, and set it gently on Theo's pillow. That night, Theo held the toy tightly as he drifted to sleep, the photo frame watching over him from the desk. Laura never mentioned either gesture gently. But David noticed, and as the days passed, something began to loosen in him. A weight he had not known how to name. He no longer dreaded walking through the door each evening. Now when he came home, there was light, a soft voice reading from a children's book, laughter, warmth. He would stop at the threshold of the living room, hand on his loosened tie, and listen. And though he never said it aloud, he knew this house was no longer silent. It was starting to feel like home. Nights in the Whitmore house had always been the hardest. The silence settled thick, the shadows too deep. Theo, small and watchful, had feared the dark since the day his mother stopped coming through the door. Most nights he woke crying, clinging to his stuffed elephant, whispering her name. Laura noticed. One evening, instead of a quick bedtime story, she brought out paper, markers, and scissors. Sitting on the floor beside his bed, she began cutting shapes, stars, moons, constellations, and taped them across the pale blue walls, building a glowing sky. "What's that one?" Theo asked, pointing. "That's Orion," she whispered. "He's strong." He watches over sleepers. And that one? Laura smiled. LRA, they say her light carries music from heaven. Theo blinked. From Mom. Laura paused, then nodded. Yes, like a lullaby she's sending down so you never have to be afraid again. Theo smiled small and real. Will you stay until I fall asleep? I will. Later that night, David returned home, his shoulders heavy. As he passed Theo's room, he heard voices, and pushed the door open slightly. Laura sat beside his son, her arm gently around him, pointing at the constellations on the wall. Theo was whispering the names after her, a quiet awe in his voice. He was smiling. David stood in the hallway, unmoving. Something in his chest ached, something unfamiliar. The next few days became a rhythm. Laura arrived after class and the house was no longer silent. She and Theo made pancakes on Saturday morning. They read books sprawled on the rug. They filled quiet afternoons with crayons, towers of blocks, and laughter. David watched from a distance. He told himself it was for Theo, but he lingered longer than he meant to. Then came another rainy night. Laura arrived soaked, her umbrella destroyed by the wind. She waved it off, smiling. But at dinner, her face was pale, her hands trembling. "You're sick," David said. "I'm fine," she murmured, swaying slightly. He caught her elbow. "Enough. Go lie down." Theo looked up, worried. "Get your elephant," David told him gently. "I'll help her." He guided Laura to the guest room. Her skin burned with fever. She mumbled about needing to study, but he hushed her. "You're staying in bed. That's final." She nodded weakly and sank into the pillows. David went to the kitchen, something he had not done in years. He made broth, returned with a steaming bowl and a cool cloth. As he sat beside her and pressed the cloth to her forehead, she stirred. "Dad," she whispered, eyes still closed. He froze. "I saw him," she murmured. "In my dream, I was 12 when he died." David swallowed. She looked so young, so vulnerable. "I miss him." He sat there still for a moment, then softly. "If I were family to you, I'd be proud." She drifted back into sleep. Later that night, Theo crept into the room, his elephant in hand. David bent low. "She's resting. She'll feel better tomorrow." Theo whispered. "Can we keep her?" David could not answer. But as he looked at the girl sleeping in his home, her quiet presence making the air feel warm again, he knew something had changed. Something ordinary, something magical. The Whitmore estate was unusually quiet that morning. Laura hummed softly as she dusted the shelves in the library, her mind already drifting toward the notes she would need to review later for her exam. Theo sat on the rug at her feet, carefully coloring in the pages of his book, occasionally glancing up at her as though making sure she wouldn't disappear. The sudden sound of the doorbell startled them both. Theo perked up. "Is it Daddy?" Laura shook her head. "He's at work, sweetheart." She wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the front door. Standing there was a man in a gray suit holding a clipboard. His expression was brisk professional. "Good morning. I'm from Everclean Services. I'm here for a routine check-in. Rachel Martinez is assigned to this residence." "Correct." Laura froze. Her throat went dry. Yes." The man's eyes narrowed. He glanced down at his papers, then back at her. "And you are?" "I heard words stuck." Theo tugged at her sleeve, confused. "That's Laura," he said innocently. The man straightened, suspicion flickering across his face. "Laura? There's no Laura in our records." Laura's pulse hammered. She opened her mouth, desperate to form an explanation, when a voice cut through the silence. "What's going on?" David's tall figure filled the hallway. He had just returned home unexpectedly, jacket draped over his arm, his presence as commanding as ever. The man turned to him. "Mr. Whitmore, forgive me. I'm the regional manager with Everclean. I came to follow up. This woman here, she isn't Rachel Martinez. She's not one of ours." David's gaze snapped to Laura, his eyes hardened. "What is he talking about?" Laura's mouth went dry. She could see Theo looking between them, worried, clutching his elephant to his chest. "Mr. Whitmore," the manager continued, "your assigned cleaner has been on medical leave. Whoever this is, she's been here under false pretenses." David said nothing for a long moment. The silence was suffocating. Finally, his voice was cold, clipped. "Leave us." The manager nodded stiffly and walked out, the door closing behind him. Laura's legs felt weak. "David, please." His voice cut through her plea. "Who are you?" She swallowed hard. "My name is Laura. Rachel is my sister. She's the one who was supposed to come, but she got hurt. I only came that first night to help her. I never meant." David's jaw clenched, his expression unreadable. "So you lied. You came into my home under a false name. You let my son believe." His voice cracked, then hardened again. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Tears blurred Laura's vision. "I didn't want to deceive you. I thought it would just be one night, that's all. But then you asked me to come back and Rachel wasn't ready to work yet. And Theo," her voice broke. "I never planned to stay this long. I never wanted to hurt either of you." David's chest rose and fell sharply, anger and something deeper twisting in his eyes. "Do you know what it feels like to finally see my son smile again and realize it was built on a lie?" She flinched. "It wasn't a lie. Not with him. Every moment with Theo was real. I care about him. I care about." She stopped herself. David stepped back as though her words had burned him. His voice was low, dangerous. "You're like everyone else. You walked into my life because you needed something. Money, security, whatever it was. You made me believe you were different." Laura's tears spilled. "That's not true. I didn't take more than I needed. I told you I wasn't here for the money." But he wasn't listening anymore. His face closed off, shudders dropping over his expression. "You should go," he said flatly. "We'll make other arrangements from tomorrow." Laura's breath caught. She opened her mouth to argue, to beg him to believe her, but the look in his eyes silenced her. She turned slowly toward the door. Theo had been standing there the whole time, confusion clouding his little face. "Are you leaving?" he whispered. Laura bent to kiss his forehead, her tears falling into his hair. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." Then she walked out into the rain, her heart breaking with each step, leaving behind the boy she had grown to love and the man whose trust she had shattered. The Whitmore estate was quiet again. Not the gentle, warm quiet that had settled in during Laura's visits, but the heavy, suffocating silence that had ruled the house for 2 long years. David walked through the halls late at night, the sound of his own footsteps echoing back at him. Theo's laughter had vanished. The faint light Laura always left on in the kitchen was gone. There was no soft hum of her voice drifting from his son's room. It was as though she had never been there, but she had, and the absence cut deeper because of it. Theo was the first to put words to what David already felt. "Daddy." His son's small voice came from the doorway one morning as David tied his tie. Theo clutched his stuffed elephant, his bottom lip trembling. "Is Miss Laura coming back?" David's throat tightened. He crouched down, smoothing Theo's hair. "No, buddy. Not anymore." Theo's eyes filled. "But she promised to read me the star story again. She said, the stars are mommy's lights." David closed his eyes. His son's pain mirrored his own. That night, unable to sleep, David poured himself a drink and sat in the study. But instead of reading reports, he found himself remembering. Laura's hands gentle as she adjusted Theo's blanket. Her laughter soft but unguarded. When Theo's paper plane crashed into her shoulder, the way she had noticed details no one else did. The photo of his late wife tucked away. The stuffed elephant abandoned. The night terrors that left Theo crying. He thought of the night she had quietly warmed milk at 2 a.m. when Theo couldn't sleep, sitting beside him until his eyelids finally closed. Of the afternoon she had slipped a note into his calendar, reminding him of his late wife's birthday, something he had nearly forgotten in the blur of work and grief. She had carried their grief as if it were her own, without asking for recognition, and he had thrown it back at her with one cruel sentence. "You're just like everyone else. You came into my life to use me." The words echoed now, bitter and hollow. The following week, David left the office earlier than usual. His car turned down a street lined with brick buildings, the modest campus of the medical school Rachel had mentioned. He wasn't sure why he was there until he saw her. Through the wide glass window of the student clinic, Laura sat at a small table with a young patient, a little boy no older than Theo, his head wrapped in a bandage. Laura leaned in close, her voice soft, her smile warm, guiding him as he tried to write something on a piece of paper. The boy beamed up at her as if she had just given him the world. David stood frozen outside, hand on the door handle, but he didn't go in. He couldn't. She looked so at ease, so full of compassion. It struck him all over again. She hadn't been lying to manipulate him. She was simply being who she was. And he had been too blinded by his own fears to see it. For the first time in years, David felt shame heavy enough to bow his head. That night, back at the estate, he walked into Theo's room. His son was asleep, curled on his side. The stuffed elephant still tucked under his chin. On the wall, the hand-drawn constellations Laura had taped up remained, a little crooked, but still glowing faintly under the nightlight. David sat on the edge of the bed, pressing his hand against his eyes. "I'm sorry, buddy," he whispered, though Theo couldn't hear him. "I'm sorry I ruined it." Later, long past midnight, David picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over Rachel's contact before he pressed call. The line clicked, and her voice was groggy. "Mr. Whitmore," he hesitated. Then, quietly, he said the words that had been clawing at him all week. "I think I owe your sister an apology." There was silence on the other end, followed by a sigh that was almost relief. "Yes," Rachel said softly. "Yes, I think you do." David leaned back in his chair, staring into the dark. He had built his life on numbers, contracts, and unshakable control. But now he realized the only thing that mattered was something far more fragile, and he had almost let it slip away forever. The morning of Theo's birthday dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming across the manicured lawn of the Whitmore estate. Inside, balloons and streamers gave the normally solemn house a rare warmth. It was not a grand party, just a quiet gathering, cake, a few decorations, and the people who mattered. Rachel stood by the window, her ankles still healing, but her smile steady. Beside her, Laura shifted uneasily, clutching a small wrapped gift in her hands. "I don't know if I should be here," she whispered. Rachel touched her arm. "You promised him. And you couldn't bear to let him down." Laura exhaled, her heart beating faster with every step toward the front door. The moment she walked inside, she heard it. "Miss Laura." Theo came racing down the hallway, his paper crown slipping sideways on his head. He flung his arms around her waist with such force she nearly stumbled. "You came. You came," he shouted, his little face glowing. Then, in a conspiratorial whisper, he added, "I knew it. Mommy invited you from heaven." Laura's throat closed. She dropped to her knees and hugged him tightly, tears already pricking her eyes. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Behind them, David appeared. He was not in his usual suit, but a simple navy sweater, sleeves rolled at the forearms. He looked softer somehow, though his eyes held the same intensity. Laura rose slowly, her gift still clutched in trembling fingers. "You didn't have to invite me," she said, her voice unsteady. His gaze met hers. "I didn't invite you for Theo." A pause. Then his words came quietly but firmly. "I invited you for me." Her breath caught. When everyone had gathered in the dining room, the cake lit with candles. Theo clapped his hands and made his wish. Then, before anyone could cut the first slice, David cleared his throat. "Before we celebrate," he said, his voice carrying across the small room. "There's something I need to say." Rachel's brows lifted in quiet surprise. Laura froze. David looked at Laura, but his words filled the room. "I thought I was done with love. That I had lost everything that made this house a home. But then one night, a girl walked through my door. She didn't come with an agenda. She didn't ask for anything. She simply helped. Helped my son laugh again. Helped me remember what it feels like to come home to light instead of silence." Laura's eyes blurred. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing not a grand diamond, but a simple gold band. "This isn't a proposal," he said softly. "It's a promise. I don't want anything more than to stand by you, if you'll let me. I want you here, not as a helper, not as a guest, but as family." He turned then, crouching to Theo's level. "Son, if you agree, I'd like Laura to be part of our family. What do you say?" Theo's grin stretched from ear to ear. He bounced on his toes, shouting, "Yes, yes, Daddy, marry her. Please marry Miss Laura." Laughter and tears filled the room at once. Laura pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Then she crossed the space between them, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. She wrapped her arms around David, holding him as if she never wanted to let go. "Yes," she whispered into his shoulder. "Yes, I want this, too." Theo squealed with joy, hugging both of them at once, wedging his small body between their embrace. Rachel dabbed at her eyes, smiling through her tears. And in that moment, in a house that had once been nothing but shadows and grief, laughter and love bloomed again. It was not the home any of them had expected. But it was finally, undeniably, a family. And so what began as a single favor on a stormy night became the miracle that healed 3 broken hearts. Laura found not just love, but a family. David discovered that second chances are real. And Theo, he finally had the laughter, the warmth, and the light of a mother's love. Again, sometimes the home we need the most isn't the one we expect. It's the one built on compassion, courage, and the simple, ordinary kind of magic that love brings. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories, where we bring you tales that warm your soul and remind you of the beauty of second chances. Stay with us because the next story might just be the one you need to hear today.